Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. Maybe you're carrying wisdom from someone who's no longer with you. Maybe you're searching for guidance that feels deeper than the noise of this world. Maybe you remember a grandparent who seemed to hold truths about life you didn't yet understand, but somehow felt were important. This story is deeply personal. Today, I'm going to tell you about something that has shaped me in ways I never imagined. A prayer my grandmother taught me when I was 7 years old. At that time, it felt like just another part of childhood. Words whispered before sleep, words I repeated without thinking. I dismissed it as something small, something sentimental, not realizing that one day those same words would become my anchor in storms I could never have prepared for. Most of you know me as Jungkook of BTS, the youngest member, the singer, dancer, performer. You see me on stage, in music videos, or through cameras flashing at airports. But what you don't see is the inner life, the doubts, the exhaustion, the pressure of trying to live up to millions of expectations while still trying to figure out who I am as a person. And what I'm about to share with you is not about fame, not about music charts, not about trophies. It's about the quietest, simplest thing that became the foundation of every choice I've made since I rediscovered it. Let's go back. I was just a little boy in Busan. It was the late 1990 seconds. My family didn't have much. Our home was small but filled with warmth. I remember the smell of the sea that always seemed close by, the sounds of markets alive with voices, and the way evenings felt quieter in Busan than they ever do now in Seoul. At 7 years old, my life was simple. School, playing with my brother, and sometimes staying at my grandmother's place when my parents were busy. My grandmother, to me, was more than just family. She carried an energy I can still feel when I close my eyes. She wasn't wealthy, she didn't have titles or recognition, but she had a peace that I couldn't understand as a child. She had survived times that would have crushed others, financial struggles, personal loss, hardships of a kind that children can't even imagine. And yet, when I think of her, I don't remember despair. I remember serenity. I remember her small wooden house in Busan, where the evenings smelled like rice and soup, where the floors creaked under our feet, and where she would sit by the window in her old chair every night after dinner. She had a ritual. After the dishes were done and the house grew quiet, she would sit down in that chair and close her eyes. Her lips would move, whispering words I couldn't hear. At first, I thought it was just her talking to herself. But one night, curiosity got the best of me. I asked her, "Grandma, what are you saying?" She opened her eyes slowly, looked at me, and gave me a smile. Not the kind of smile that says, "Don't ask too many questions," but the kind that says, "I'm glad you asked." And in her soft voice, a voice with more authority than I've ever heard from anyone on a stage or in a meeting, she said, "I'm asking for guidance, child. I'm asking to be shown the right path." At 7 years old, I didn't really understand what that meant. I asked, "But what if no one answers?" It was a child's brutal honesty, simple and sharp. She smiled again, this time with a glimmer of knowing. "Oh, Jungkook, the answer always comes, but sometimes we're too busy talking to listen." That night, she taught me her prayer. A short, simple prayer, just 26 words. She spoke them slowly, and I repeated them after her. "Dear God, help me to see what you see, to love what you love, and to do what you would have me do. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. And help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. Amen." 26 words. I didn't know it then, but those words would live inside me for the rest of my life. As a child, I thought it was just something nice to say before bed, a kind of ritual like brushing your teeth or folding your blanket. I had no idea that this small prayer contained wisdom that would one day hold me together when everything else seemed to be falling apart. For many years after that summer, I forgot about it. I was busy growing up, busy trying to chase dreams, busy becoming the teenager who left Busan to train in Seoul. And honestly, in those years, I believed only in effort, in practice, in talent, in work. I believed if I worked hard enough, I could solve everything. Who needed a prayer when you had ambition? But here's the thing about seeds planted in childhood. They don't die, they wait. And when the right season comes, they bloom. When I was a trainee, the pressure was unbearable. Every day felt like a test I could fail at any moment. Sometimes I felt invisible. Sometimes I felt like I wasn't enough. There were nights when I questioned everything, why I left home, why I thought I could do this, why I was chasing something so uncertain. In those nights, memories of my grandmother would return, not full sentences, not the whole prayer, but fragments. Her smile, her soft voice, the way she said, the answer always comes. At first I ignored it, but life has a way of reminding you of what you need most. And slowly, those 26 words began to resurface. That's the beginning of the story I want to share with you. A story not about stages or fame, but about guidance, faith, and the quiet strength we inherit from those who came before us. Because what I've learned is this. In a world obsessed with achievements, the simplest wisdom often holds the most power. There are moments in life when everything you thought was solid suddenly feels fragile. For me, those moments began when I left Busan and moved to Seoul. I was still just a teenager, younger than most of the others, carrying a dream that felt too big for my small shoulders. People saw my talent, my singing, my dancing, the way I picked up things quickly, but what they didn't see was the quiet fear inside me. Seoul was loud, overwhelming, and relentless. The practice rooms felt like battlefields. Every trainee was fighting for a future that only a few could claim. I remember the exhaustion that wrapped itself around me like a heavy coat. The doubt that whispered late at night when the lights in the dorm were off. What if you're not enough? What if you never make it? What if you're just wasting your youth chasing something impossible? In those moments, I didn't think about my grandmother's prayer. I thought about survival. I thought about how many hours I could push myself to train. I thought about how to match the others who seemed more confident, more certain, more deserving. But the strange thing about pressure is that it squeezes out memories you didn't even know you still carried. One night, after a particularly brutal day of training, my voice cracked during vocal lessons. My body felt like it would collapse during dance practice. I sat on the floor of my room, staring at nothing. And in the silence, like a whisper carried across years and distance, I heard her voice again. Help me to see what you see. It startled me. It wasn't like I intentionally tried to remember. It was just there, as if my grandmother was sitting beside me again, in her wooden chair by the window. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was 7 again, repeating those words after her. I didn't say the whole prayer that night, just the first line. But even that small fragment shifted something in me. Instead of obsessing over how I had failed that day, I began to wonder, what if I could see myself the way she saw me? What if I could see this path the way God might see it, not as failure, but as preparation? From that night on, the prayer began to return piece by piece. Sometimes it was just, give me the courage to follow where you lead. Other times it was, help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. I didn't even realize I was praying. I was just surviving. But survival, I've learned, often begins with remembering. When BTS finally debuted, people might think everything became easier. It didn't. The spotlight that so many dream about is not always a comfort. It can be blinding. Suddenly the world was watching, judging, expecting, and I was still just a boy trying to figure out who I was. I questioned whether I belonged, whether I could carry the weight of being the youngest, whether my voice and presence were strong enough to stand beside Hyungs, who seemed so sure of themselves. There were times when criticism felt louder than any cheering crowd. Times when I wondered if this was worth the endless sacrifice. Times when I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the face staring back at me because all I could see were flaws. And in those moments, the prayer became more than memory. It became lifeline. I would whisper it quietly when no one was around, almost embarrassed, almost afraid. But every time I said the words, a shift happened inside me. Not in my circumstances, because the challenges were still there, the work was still exhausting, the expectations still impossible, but in my perspective, the prayer didn't promise success, it didn't erase fear, but it gave me a framework to stand on when everything felt unstable. See what you see. That reminded me to step outside of my narrow vision. Maybe the exhaustion wasn't punishment, it was growth. Maybe the criticism wasn't destruction, it was refinement. Love what you love. That reminded me that this journey was not just about me, it was about music, about connection, about army. Do what you would have me do. That reminded me that even when I felt unworthy, there was still something meaningful I could give. And then came the hardest line. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. That one hurt, because I wanted certainty. I wanted to know the outcome before I committed my heart fully. But life doesn't give you that. My grandmother's prayer didn't ask for certainty. It asked for courage. Looking back, I realized that without this prayer, I might have walked away. I might have let the weight of fear convince me to quit before BTS ever became what it is today. But those 26 words, spoken decades earlier by a woman in a small house in Busan, were enough to keep me standing. In those early years, I learned that sometimes survival doesn't come from more strength, more skill, or more knowledge. Sometimes survival comes from surrender, from whispering words that remind you that you are not carrying everything alone. The prayer I thought I had forgotten became the very thing that carried me into the storm of fame. And though the storm would only grow stronger, so too did the roots of that prayer in my life. Success has a strange way of testing you. When you're chasing it, you believe that once you reach it, all your doubts will disappear. But the truth is, success doesn't silence the questions, it amplifies them. When BTS began to rise beyond Korea, when our music started reaching across oceans and continents, when stadiums filled with tens of thousands of people chanting our names, I thought I should feel invincible. Instead, I often felt small. The bigger the stage, the heavier the responsibility became. Every move, every word, every mistake was magnified under a global spotlight. I remember standing backstage at one of our first major stadium concerts. The sound of armies singing outside was like thunder rolling through the walls. I should have felt nothing but excitement. And yet, deep inside, I felt a trembling, a question that wouldn't leave me alone. Who am I in all of this? Am I just an image, a performer, or am I something more? In moments like that, the applause can't quiet the noise inside your head. Success on the outside doesn't always translate to peace on the inside. I began to realize that fame could become another kind of prison if I didn't anchor myself to something deeper. That's when my grandmother's prayer returned again, not as a memory of childhood, but as a compass for my soul. I would whisper it before concerts, sometimes silently, sometimes under my breath, as we lined up to walk on stage. Dear God, help me to see what you see, to love what you love, and to do what you would have me do. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path, and help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. Those words reminded me that I wasn't standing on that stage just for fame or numbers or trophies. I was there to connect, to give, to reflect something larger than myself. Help me to see what you see. When I looked at the crowd, I tried not just to see fans, cameras, or flashing lights. I tried to see human beings who were giving me their trust, who needed music not as entertainment but as comfort, as strength, as belonging, to love what you love. This became my way of surviving the chaos. If love was at the center, love for music, love for people, love for the meaning behind our songs, then the exhaustion became more bearable. Love turned endless rehearsals into offerings, sleepless nights into purpose. To do what you would have me do. This line kept me from drowning in comparison. In a world where everything is measured views, likes, charts, it's easy to think your worth depends on numbers. But this prayer reminded me that not every path is mine to walk, not every battle is mine to fight. I wasn't called to be the best in everything. I was called to do what was placed in front of me with honesty and courage. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. That was the hardest part, because in the middle of fame, you start to believe you need to control every outcome, every detail, every moment. But the truth is, no one sees the whole path. Not me, not anyone. What I could do was take the next step with courage, even if I didn't know where it would lead. And then came the final line. Help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. Trust is not easy when you feel the weight of millions of eyes. Trust is not easy when one mistake can become global news within minutes. But this prayer reminded me that the story was bigger than my fears, that the plan was larger than my anxieties. There were nights when I would return to the hotel room after concerts, too exhausted to speak, too overwhelmed to process the love we received. And in that silence, I would repeat the prayer again, not because it magically fixed everything, but because it grounded me. It reminded me that I was more than the image people saw, more than the headlines, more than the numbers. It reminded me that even at the height of fame, the most important voice I could listen to was the quiet one I first heard in a small house in Busan. The voice of my grandmother, who had nothing the world would call success, but who carried peace that all the trophies in the world could never buy. And so, even as BTS was conquering stages across the world, I was still that boy searching for balance, for meaning, for something deeper than applause. The prayer became my way of holding on to myself in a world that constantly tried to define me. Because sometimes the most powerful guidance doesn't come from the noise of the crowd, but from the silence of a whispered prayer. Fame is loud. It surrounds you with voices, with lights, with attention that never seems to fade. But in the middle of all that noise, I often found myself feeling more alone than I ever expected. There is a kind of loneliness that comes not from being unseen, but from being seen too much and yet not truly known. When the world celebrates you, it's easy for people to assume that your life is perfect. They see the concerts, the awards, the smiling pictures. What they don't see are the nights when the hotel room feels colder than any winter, when you lie awake staring at the ceiling and wonder why your heart feels so heavy, even though you should be grateful. I remember one of those nights vividly. We had just finished a huge show, one that fans said was unforgettable. On the outside, I was smiling, joking, thanking everyone. But as soon as the door of my hotel room closed behind me, silence fell like a curtain. And that silence was deafening. It asked me questions I didn't want to answer. Who are you when the lights go out? Who are you when no one is cheering? Who are you when the applause fades? It was in moments like these that my grandmother's prayer returned, not as a childhood memory, but as a rope pulling me back from the edge. Help me to see what you see. What did that mean in my loneliness? It meant looking at my life not just through the lens of emptiness, but through gratitude, seeing that even in the silence, there was meaning. That maybe the quiet was not abandonment, but invitation to rest, to reflect, to remember that worth doesn't come only from being busy or adored, to love what you love. That meant learning to love myself even when I didn't feel lovable, learning to love the parts of me that were still growing, still uncertain, still imperfect. It also meant choosing love over isolation, sending a message to a friend instead of shutting down, calling my family instead of pretending I was fine, and to do what you would have me do. This line cut through my pride. Because in loneliness, it's easy to hide, to wall yourself off, to pretend you don't need anyone. But the prayer reminded me that sometimes the most important action is the most vulnerable one. Asking for help, admitting your weakness, opening up instead of closing down. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. This became my comfort, because loneliness always whispers, this will last forever. But the prayer reminded me that I didn't need to see forever. I just needed the courage to take one step at a time, to keep showing up for rehearsals, for my brothers in BTS, for myself, even when my heart felt tired, and help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. This was the hardest to accept, because my plan for happiness was simple. If we succeeded, if fans loved us, if I gave my best, then I should feel complete. But reality didn't follow that plan. Success didn't erase loneliness. Achievements didn't guarantee peace. And yet, in that gap between what I thought I needed and what life actually gave me, I learned trust. Trust that maybe the pain had purpose. Trust that maybe the silence was teaching me something no stage ever could. In those years, I discovered that the most dangerous battles are not fought in public, but in private. And the strongest victories are not the ones everyone applauds, but the ones no one sees, like choosing to hold on when you want to give up, choosing to believe when doubts scream louder than hope. The prayer didn't eliminate my loneliness, but it transformed it. Instead of being a prison, it became a classroom. It taught me to listen to myself, to slow down, to reconnect with why I started this journey in the first place. And slowly, I began to understand something my grandmother knew all along. Peace doesn't come from the absence of noise. Peace comes from the presence of guidance. That prayer became my companion in hotel rooms, in airplanes, in dressing rooms before performances. It was like carrying a small piece of Busan inside me wherever I went, a reminder that even in the loneliest moments, I was not abandoned. Because sometimes the most powerful voices are not the ones that cheer the loudest, but the ones that whisper quietly when you feel most alone. Fame doesn't just test your stamina or your talent, it tests your relationships. And for me, some of the most painful lessons didn't come from the stage or the studio, but from the people closest to my heart. There were seasons when my personal life and my professional responsibilities collided in ways that tore me apart inside. To the outside world, I was Jungkook of BTS, strong, confident, always giving my best. But behind closed doors, I was a young man trying to navigate friendships, love, trust, and disappointment, all while carrying the weight of expectations that never went away. Relationships in the middle of constant travel, relentless schedules, and public scrutiny are fragile. Sometimes they crack under the pressure, sometimes they shatter completely. And when they did, I felt it deeply. I remember one particular conflict. A friend I trusted misunderstood my silence, mistaking it for distance. In truth, I was drowning in exhaustion, but to him, it looked like neglect. Words were exchanged, sharp and heavy. What hurt the most wasn't the anger, but the sense of betrayal on both sides. He thought I had abandoned him. I thought he couldn't see me for who I truly was. It was in moments like these that my grandmother's prayer once again became my compass. Help me to see what you see. Instead of replaying the hurt over and over in my head, I tried to look beyond my pride. What if his frustration wasn't really anger, but loneliness? What if the silence between us was not rejection, but pain? Seeing through another's eyes became a lifeline, not just for my relationships, but for my heart. To love what you love. This line cut through my selfishness, because love, I learned, isn't always a feeling, it's a choice. A commitment to seek the good even when the emotions are messy, even when forgiveness feels impossible. Love in friendships, in family, even in romance, it means holding on when everything in you wants to let go and to do what you would have me do. There were times I wanted to walk away to protect myself from further hurt. But the prayer reminded me that action isn't about what feels easiest, it's about what brings healing. Sometimes that meant apologizing first, even when I felt misunderstood. Sometimes it meant reaching out when silence seemed safer. Sometimes it meant letting go with grace when holding on would only cause more harm. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. Relationships are unpredictable. You don't always know if reconciliation is possible, if trust can be rebuilt, if love can survive the storm. Courage in this context didn't mean forcing things to work. It meant showing up with honesty, even without guarantees. It meant being willing to try again, even when fear whispered that it would end in more pain. And help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. This was the most difficult lesson, because my plan was simple. I wanted everyone I loved to stay. I wanted every friendship to last, every bond to remain unbroken. But life doesn't work that way. Some relationships end, some drift apart, some transform into something you never expected. Trusting the plan meant believing that even loss could carry hidden purpose, that even heartbreak could shape me into someone stronger, more compassionate, more real. Over time, I began to see that conflict and reconciliation are both teachers. They reveal who you are when your pride is wounded, when your patience runs thin, when your love is tested. They reveal whether you cling to bitterness or choose forgiveness, whether you protect your ego or open your heart. The prayer didn't prevent the pain of broken relationships, but it prevented the pain from breaking me. It kept me from becoming hardened, from building walls so thick that no one could reach me. It reminded me that vulnerability is not weakness, but courage. That love is not fragile, but resilient when rooted in something deeper. Looking back, I can see how those 26 words saved me not only on stage, but in the quiet wars of the heart. They reminded me that life is not about avoiding wounds, it's about healing through them. Because sometimes the greatest victories are not in the spotlight, but in the unseen moments when you choose to forgive, when you choose to love, when you choose to stay soft in a world that tempts you to become hard. There is a difference between being tired and being empty. Tiredness can be fixed with rest. Emptiness lingers even after you've slept, even after you've eaten, even after the world tells you you should be happy. There was a season in my life when I reached that emptiness. The schedules were endless: flights, rehearsals, recordings, interviews, performances. My body moved because it had to, but my heart was running on fumes. I remember standing on stage, smiling for the crowd, singing with all the energy I could summon. And yet, inside, I felt hollow. I would walk off stage, drenched in sweat, surrounded by cheers that faded the moment the door closed behind me. And in that silence, the hollowness would echo louder than anything. Burnout is not dramatic. It creeps in quietly. It starts with small compromises, skipping meals, ignoring pain, pushing through exhaustion. And then, one day, you realize you're living on autopilot, disconnected from the very things that once gave you joy. That was where I found myself. I remember one night in particular, we had been performing back-to-back shows, and my voice was strained to the point of breaking. I sat in the corner of a dressing room after the concert, my head in my hands, my chest heavy. I thought, I can't keep this up. Not like this. Maybe I'm not built for this life after all. It was in that darkness that the prayer returned. Not gently this time, but forcefully, like a light piercing through fog. The words rose up from somewhere deep inside me, words I hadn't planned to speak, words I barely had the strength to whisper. Dear God, help me to see what you see, to love what you love, and to do what you would have me do. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. And help me to trust that Your plan is better than mine. Something shifted. Not my exhaustion, my body was still worn out. Not my circumstances, the schedule wasn't about to change. But my perspective cracked open just enough to let hope back in. Help me to see what you see. What if burnout wasn't just weakness, but a signal? A reminder that I'm human, not a machine. That even in the grind of endless days, there was still beauty to notice: a smile from a fan, a laugh from a member, the warmth of music itself. To love what you love. Burnout often makes you resent what you once adored, but love reframes everything. Love reminded me that my work wasn't just work, it was connection. Every note, every lyric, every performance was a bridge to someone who needed it. Love didn't erase exhaustion, but it transformed it into offering, and to do what you would have me do. This line confronted my pride, because sometimes what I needed to do wasn't to push harder, it was to pause, to rest, to admit that I wasn't invincible. Action doesn't always mean grinding endlessly. Sometimes the bravest action is stepping back, letting yourself breathe, choosing recovery over collapse. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. At that moment, I couldn't see how I would survive the next show, let alone the next tour. But courage didn't demand seeing the whole future. It only asked me to take the next step, to walk on stage one more time, to sing one more song, to trust that strength would come in the moment it was needed, and help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. This was the hardest surrender. My plan was simple: keep pushing, keep proving, keep performing until I was empty. But maybe the better plan was different. Maybe the path forward wasn't about forcing myself beyond breaking, but about learning balance, learning humility, learning to let others support me. That night, the prayer didn't fix my burnout. It didn't refill my energy like magic. But it did something more important. It reconnected me to meaning. It reminded me that exhaustion doesn't define me, that emptiness isn't permanent, that even in the weakest moment, I was not alone. In the months that followed, I learned to weave the prayer into my routine. Before rehearsals, after performances, in the quiet moments between chaos. It became my way of grounding myself, of reminding myself that my worth wasn't measured by productivity, that my identity wasn't limited to perfection, that my life wasn't just about surviving schedules, but about serving something deeper. Burnout taught me a painful truth. Success without soul is hollow. And the only way to protect your soul in a world that constantly demands more is to return again and again to the quiet voice that tells you you are more than what you produce. My grandmother's prayer became that voice, and because of it, I kept walking. The world has a way of turning every word you say, every action you take, into something bigger than you ever intended. When you live under a global spotlight, even the smallest details become headlines. Even the smallest mistakes become magnified. For me, this was one of the hardest parts of fame. Not the long hours, not the rehearsals, not the travel, though those were exhausting too. What cut deepest were the voices of strangers who thought they knew me but only saw fragments. The criticism, the assumptions, the endless analysis of my life. It sometimes felt like the weight of 1,000 judgments pressing on my chest. There were nights I scrolled through comments, feeling the sting of words meant to wound. Nights when my name trended not because of music, but because of rumors, half-truths, or outright lies. Nights when I felt stripped of privacy, when I wondered if people saw me as a human being at all. And in those nights, the question always came, how do I hold on to myself when the world is trying to tell me who I am? It was in that storm that my grandmother's prayer rose again, steady as a lighthouse in waves. Help me to see what you see. When criticism burned, this line reminded me to look beyond the noise, to see not only the voices that tore me down, but the millions of voices that lifted me up. To see that sometimes hurtful words came from people projecting their own pain. To see myself not through the lens of strangers, but through the eyes of love. through the perspective of purpose, to love what you love. It's easy to harden your heart in the face of criticism, to become defensive, to let bitterness take root. But this line kept me from turning cold. It reminded me to choose love over resentment, to focus on those who supported me rather than those who misunderstood me, to keep creating, not out of fear of judgment, but out of love for music and connection, and to do what you would have me do. This became my guide in deciding how to respond. Not every battle was mine to fight. Not every rumor needed a rebuttal. Sometimes the wisest action was silence. Sometimes it was honesty. Sometimes it was simply continuing the work I was called to do. The prayer taught me to discern, to act not out of wounded pride, but out of wisdom. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. Criticism often made me want to retreat, to hide, to step away from the spotlight altogether. But courage meant staying, showing up, singing anyway, dancing anyway, giving anyway. Even when I didn't know how the world would receive it, even when I couldn't see whether love or hate would greet me on the other side, and help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. If it were up to me, I would have chosen the path without public scrutiny, without constant analysis, without the wounds of strangers' words. But perhaps the plan was bigger than my comfort. Perhaps the struggles with criticism were shaping resilience, compassion, humility. Perhaps they were teaching me to anchor my identity not in applause, not in headlines, not in numbers, but in something unshakable. Over time, I began to realize that criticism, as painful as it was, carried hidden gifts. It stripped away illusions. It forced me to confront who I really was apart from others' opinions. It pushed me to separate my worth from my reputation. It taught me that peace doesn't come when everyone approves of you. Peace comes when you know who you are, even if the world misunderstands. And through it all, the prayer remained, whispered before interviews, repeated silently while scrolling through harsh comments, spoken aloud in empty hotel rooms. It was not a shield that blocked out pain, but a compass that guided me through it. Because when the voices of the world grew too loud, I needed something stronger than public opinion to define me. I needed something deeper than applause or criticism. And that something was the prayer my grandmother first taught me as a child. It reminded me that I was not created to please everyone. I was created to live with integrity, to love deeply, to follow courageously, to trust fully. And that truth became my freedom. Fame teaches you to smile through almost anything, to keep performing even when your heart is breaking, to say, I'm fine when inside you are anything but. But there are moments in life when the mask slips, when the weight of loss is too heavy to hide, when no amount of applause can drown out the sound of grief. I have faced such moments. Times when someone I loved was suddenly no longer there. Times when distance and duty kept me from saying goodbye. Times when life reminded me with brutal clarity that no matter how big the stage, no matter how bright the lights, we are still human, and humans lose. The thing about loss is that it changes the shape of your world. One day, everything feels familiar. The next, the absence, is louder than any presence. You hear their voice in echoes. You see their face in dreams. You feel their absence in every quiet space. And in those moments, success feels hollow, achievements feel meaningless, and you find yourself asking the oldest questions of humanity. Why? Why now? Why this? It was in one of those seasons of grief that I found myself once again reaching for my grandmother's prayer. Not because I wanted it, but because I needed it. Help me to see what you see. What could there possibly be to see in loss? At first, nothing but pain. But slowly, the prayer taught me to see beyond absence, to see the memories that still lived, the lessons that still shaped me, the love that hadn't died even though the person was gone. To see that loss doesn't erase love, it magnifies it. to love what you love. Grief tempts you to turn inward, to let your heart harden, to stop caring as a way of protecting yourself. But this line pushed me the other way. To keep loving, even when love felt dangerous. To honor those I had lost by continuing to love the people still with me. To refuse the lie that loss should make you close your heart. And to do what you would have me do. In grief, action feels impossible. You want to stop, to withdraw, to let the world move without you. But this prayer reminded me that even in mourning, life asks us to move step by step, breath by breath. Sometimes what you would have me do meant writing a song that carried my pain into melody. Sometimes it meant simply showing up for rehearsal, even when my chest was heavy. Sometimes it meant holding a friend's hand and letting silence speak. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. Loss is a fog. You can't see tomorrow. You can barely see the next hour. But courage is not about clarity, it's about trust. It's about taking the next step even when your heart is shattered. It's about choosing to believe that light will return, even when the night feels endless. And help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. This was the most painful line to pray. Because my plan was simple. I wanted more time, more conversations, more chances to say what I never said. Trusting a larger plan felt impossible, unfair. And yet, it was the only way forward. To believe that even loss could be woven into something greater. To trust that the story wasn't over, even when it felt like an ending. In those seasons of grief, I discovered that loss doesn't mean love has ended. Love doesn't disappear with death. It lingers in memories, in influence, in the way someone shaped your heart. My grandmother's prayer became a bridge between grief and hope, a way of holding sorrow without letting it consume me, a way of honoring loss without being defined by it. And in those moments, I felt closer to her than ever. The woman who had first whispered those words in a small house in Busan had given me a gift I didn't understand as a child but needed desperately as a man. She had given me a prayer that could hold me in joy, in burnout, in criticism, and yes, even in grief. Because sometimes love is proven not in how we celebrate life, but in how we carry loss. For much of my life, I thought success was the destination. That if I trained hard enough, sang well enough, performed perfectly enough, then I would finally feel complete. But the more I achieved, the more I realized something unsettling. Success alone does not satisfy the soul. Every trophy was a moment of joy, yes, but also a fleeting one. Every sold-out stadium was breathtaking, but when the lights went out, I was still left with myself, with my thoughts, with the same questions echoing in my heart. Why am I here? What is this all for? It was in these questions that my grandmother's prayer became more than comfort. It became direction. Help me to see what you see. Slowly, I began to see my life not just as a career, but as a calling. The stage was no longer only about proving myself. It was about connection, about carrying someone else's burdens for 3 minutes in a song, about giving someone hope when they felt hopeless, about letting someone know they were not alone, to love what you love. I started to understand that music is love in motion. It is one of the purest ways to give of yourself. When I sang with love for ARMY, for my brothers in BTS, for humanity itself, the fatigue, the criticism, the loneliness, they all became secondary. Love made the impossible bearable. Love gave me strength that no amount of ambition ever could, and to do what you would have me do. This line shaped how I chose projects, how I lived my days. Not everything I could do was meant for me to do. There were opportunities that promised fame or fortune, but they didn't align with what I was truly called to. The prayer helped me discern to say yes when the path aligned with purpose, and no when it was only feeding ego. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. Purpose is never a straight line. There were times I doubted whether the risks were worth it. Times I feared disappointing people. Times I questioned if I was enough to carry the role I had been given. Courage didn't mean having all the answers, it meant showing up anyway. It meant taking the next step into the unknown, believing that clarity would come in its own time. And help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. This was the final shift. My plan was always about control, achieve this, prove that, earn respect, secure stability. But purpose often asks for surrender. It asks you to give up certainty, to step into roles you never imagined for yourself. When I trusted the larger plan, I discovered that my life was not just about me, it was about service, about impact, about being part of something greater than I could ever design. Through this prayer, I began to see my journey differently. BTS was no longer just a group chasing dreams, it was a vessel carrying meaning into the world. My voice was no longer just sound, it was a thread stitching hearts together across continents. My life was no longer just survival, it was participation in a story that transcended my own. I realized then what my grandmother had known all along. True purpose is never self-centered. It is always about giving more than you take, loving more than you expect in return, serving something larger than yourself. The prayer that once seemed like a simple childhood ritual had become the architecture of my life. It guided not only my decisions, but my identity. It told me who I was, why I was here, and what it all meant. And in discovering that, I found a peace that success alone could never give. Because purpose is the only stage that never closes, the only performance that never ends, the only song that keeps playing long after the applause fades. Every journey needs an anchor, something that keeps you grounded when the storms rise and the winds threaten to blow you off course. For me, that anchor has never been fame, or success, or even the music itself. My anchor has been 26 words whispered to me by my grandmother in a small house in Busan. I didn't understand them at 7 years old. At that time, they were just words like lullabies sung to a child before bed. But now, after years of triumphs and failures, after the weight of expectations and the silence of loneliness, after the joy of connection and the heartbreak of loss, I understand. Those 26 words hold the essence of everything I needed. Perspective, love, courage, and trust. Dear God, help me to see what you see, to love what you love, and to do what you would have me do. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path, and help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. Amen. These words are not magic. They do not erase struggle. They do not guarantee easy paths. But they do something even more powerful. They change how you walk through life. They turn fear into courage, confusion into clarity, exhaustion into offering, loneliness into presence, and loss into love. I say this prayer every morning now. Before I check my phone, before I look at my schedule, before I face the rush of the day. It takes only 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds shape everything that follows. Because this prayer reminds me, I am not just performing, I am connecting. I am not just working, I am serving. I am not just surviving, I am participating in something larger than myself. And I believe the same can be true for you. You don't need to believe in God the way my grandmother did to benefit from this wisdom. You don't even need to use the same words. What matters is the principle behind them, the willingness to look beyond yourself, to love more deeply than your ego allows, to act with courage even in uncertainty, and to trust that life may hold better plans than the ones you've drawn. Maybe for you, it's not a prayer but a mantra. Maybe it's not whispered to God, but spoken into the silence of your own heart. However it comes, the point is the same. Guidance is always available, if you're humble enough to ask for it and brave enough to follow it. Sometimes the loudest wisdom comes from the quietest voices. A grandmother's whisper, a childhood memory, a simple phrase that seems too small to matter until it becomes the foundation of everything. I never got to show my grandmother the stages, the songs, the journey her words helped carry me through. She never saw the crowds or the lights, but in a way, she has been there all along. Every time I repeat her prayer, I carry her with me. Every time those words guide me, her presence is alive in me. That is her legacy. And maybe now it can be yours too. So, as I end this story, I want to leave you with an invitation. Think of the guidance you've received in your life, the words of someone who loved you unconditionally, the wisdom of someone who carried peace through storms. And if you can't think of any, borrow mine until you find your own. Because maybe what you need right now isn't more analysis, more options, more noise. Maybe what you need is 26 words. Maybe what you need is the courage to ask for guidance and the humility to follow it. And maybe, just maybe, those words will change your life the way they changed mine. Criticism is one thing. You can learn to live with people not liking you, to accept that not everyone will cheer for you. But controversy, that is a different kind of fire. It doesn't just test your skin, it burns straight into your heart. There were times in my life when misunderstandings, rumors, or mistakes turned into storms far bigger than I ever imagined. A single photo, a misunderstood gesture, a word taken out of context, it could ignite headlines around the world. Suddenly, I was not just Jungkook the singer. I was Jungkook the controversy, Jungkook the headline, Jungkook the story. People debated without ever asking who I really was. The weight of those moments was crushing. Nights when I couldn't sleep, scrolling endlessly through articles that twisted narratives until I barely recognized myself. Mornings when I woke with a heavy chest, dreading the tidal wave of opinions waiting online. The scariest part wasn't the hate itself, it was the fear that I would lose myself trying to defend against it. And yet, in those flames, my grandmother's prayer returned stronger than ever. Help me to see what you see. In the chaos, I wanted to see only injustice, but the prayer pushed me deeper. What if this fire was revealing something I couldn't see before? What if it was purifying, not destroying? What if even here, meaning could be found? To love what you love. Love in controversy feels impossible. The instinct is to fight, to push back, to prove yourself right. But love reminded me to keep my heart open, to focus on those who stood by me rather than those who tried to tear me down. Love meant choosing dignity over retaliation, peace over bitterness, and to do what you would have me do. Every controversy demands a response, but not every response heals. Some situations called for silence, others for honesty, others for humility. The prayer became my guide, not to act from fear, not to act from pride, but to act from wisdom. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. Controversy clouds everything. You don't know if the truth will surface, if people will ever see your heart, if your reputation will survive. Courage in those moments was simply taking the next step, showing up for the music, for my brothers, for army without guarantees, and help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. If it were up to me, I would have chosen a life without storms, a life without misunderstandings, without the fire of controversy. But perhaps the larger plan was shaping me through them. Perhaps I needed the fire to burn away illusions, to teach me resilience, to make me stronger than applause alone ever could. Looking back, I see that controversy was not the end of me. It was a crucible. It taught me who I was when everything else was stripped away. It forced me to ask, do you still know who you are when the world doubts you? Do you still stand in love when others speak hate? Do you still walk in purpose when your name is dragged through mud? The answer came not from strength, but from surrender. From repeating those 26 words in the middle of the fire, letting them steady my shaking hands and calm my restless mind. And when the flames finally died down, I realized something extraordinary. I was still here, still singing, still standing, still carrying the prayer that had carried me. Because sometimes the fire doesn't destroy you. Sometimes It forges you. The spotlight prepares you for public criticism. It hardens you against strangers' voices. It trains you to withstand storms of opinion. But nothing prepares you for the moment when the wound doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within, from someone you trusted. There was a time when the sharpest pain in my life wasn't from headlines or rumors, but from a person I considered close. Someone I thought would stand with me through anything. But trust, once broken, doesn't break quietly. It shatters loudly, scattering into pieces that cut you every time you try to pick them back up. I won't share every detail. Some wounds are too personal, too tangled with lives beyond my own. But I will say this: betrayal doesn't only steal your trust, it makes you question your own judgment. How did I not see this coming? Was I blind? Was I naive? The questions haunted me. The pain wasn't just about what they did, it was about what it revealed in me. And in the nights when anger pressed against my chest, when disappointment turned into a bitter taste I couldn't swallow, the prayer my grandmother taught me once again rose to the surface. Help me to see what you see. What could there be to see in betrayal? Only darkness, I thought. But the prayer forced me to look beyond. To see not just what was taken, but what remained. To see that even broken trust can teach, even shattered bonds can shape. To see that betrayal doesn't mean love was wasted, it means love was real enough to risk being broken. To love what you love. This was the hardest line of all. How do you love when your heart feels torn apart? How do you love someone who hurt you? For me, it didn't mean excusing their actions or pretending nothing happened. It meant refusing to let hatred define me. It meant choosing to stay soft in a world that urged me to harden. It meant protecting my heart from becoming like the very wound that hurt it. And to do what you would have me do. In betrayal, action feels impossible. Do you confront? Do you walk away? Do you fight for what was lost? Each situation demanded wisdom I didn't feel I had. The prayer reminded me that not every action was mine to take. Sometimes doing what I was meant to do meant silence. Sometimes it meant forgiveness without reconciliation. Sometimes it meant letting go, even when my heart wanted to hold on. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. Betrayal blinds you. You can't see the future because you're too busy staring at the wound in front of you. Courage meant walking forward anyway, believing that life could still hold joy, even after trust was broken. Believing that my story wasn't defined by one person's choices. And help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. My plan was simple. Loyalty would be met with loyalty, trust with trust, love with love. When that plan collapsed, I felt lost. But trusting a larger plan meant believing that even betrayal could be woven into growth, that even brokenness could make me whole in ways I never expected. Looking back, I can see how that season, as painful as it was, reshaped me. It taught me to lean more deeply on truth rather than appearances. It taught me to treasure the people who truly stood by me. It taught me that betrayal doesn't have the final word, healing does. The world saw the surface. Whispers of controversy, headlines filled with speculation, fans debating what they thought they knew. But what they didn't see was a young man on his knees, whispering 26 words into the silence, asking for guidance when trust was gone. That prayer didn't erase the pain of betrayal, but it kept the pain from turning into bitterness. It kept me human when the world tried to make me hard. It reminded me that even in the deepest wound, love is still stronger than hate. Because betrayal may break your trust, but it does not have to break your soul. The stage gives you a name. The world gives you a label. Fans give you love. Critics give you judgment. But at the end of the day, when the lights fade and the noise dies down, you are left alone with the simplest, hardest question: who am I really? There was a time when this question consumed me. Everyone called me Jungkook of BTS, the golden maknae, the idol who could do anything. And yet, inside, I sometimes felt like I was disappearing beneath those titles. The more people defined me, the less I felt I knew myself. Who was I without the music? Who was I without the applause? Who was I when I wasn't performing, when the cameras weren't on, when no one was watching? This was not a question success could answer. It was not a question fans could answer. It wasn't even a question my brothers could answer for me. This was a question only I could face, and it terrified me. In those nights when identity felt like sand slipping through my fingers, when I looked in the mirror and couldn't tell the difference between the image the world wanted and the person I really was, I turned again to the prayer my grandmother had given me. Help me to see what you see. When I looked at myself, I often saw flaws. I saw mistakes, insecurities, failures hidden beneath achievements. But what if there was more to me than what I saw? What if, through a higher perspective, I was not just an idol, not just a performer, but a person with intrinsic worth? The prayer taught me that identity is not something the world gives. It's something deeper, something eternal. To love what you love. This line became a mirror. Did I only love the version of myself that succeeded? Or could I also love the version of myself that stumbled? The quiet, awkward, unsure boy from Busan. To love what God loves meant to accept myself wholly, not just the stage persona, but the private self. Not just the perfection, but the imperfection. And to do what you would have me do. Identity is not just about being, it's about becoming. It's not just asking, who am I, but who am I called to be? This prayer reminded me that my worth wasn't tied to what I had already done, but to what I was still meant to do. That even when I didn't fully understand myself, I could still walk forward in purpose. Give me the courage to follow where you lead, even when I can't see the whole path. In identity crisis, the path feels invisible. You don't know who you are becoming, only that you're changing. Courage, in that season, meant letting go of the image people had built around me and daring to discover the truth of who I was, piece by piece, step by step. And help me to trust that your plan is better than mine. My plan was simple: to hold tightly to the identity the world celebrated, to stay safe inside the image everyone adored. But trust meant loosening that grip. Trust meant believing that I was more than a label, more than a role, more than a reputation. That I could step into a larger story, even if it meant shedding skins that once felt like safety. Through this prayer, I discovered something profound. Identity is not found in applause, but in alignment. Not in how loudly the world names you, but in how deeply you know yourself. I am Jungkook of BTS, yes, but I am also Jungkook, the son, the brother, the friend, the human being searching for meaning like everyone else. And I am not defined by what I achieve or what people say. I am defined by the love I carry, the purpose I follow, the courage I choose, and the trust I place in something greater than myself. The crisis didn't disappear overnight. Identity is not a question you answer. Once it's a question you live into. But my grandmother's prayer gave me the strength to keep asking, to keep growing, to keep believing that who I am is not limited to what the world sees. Because sometimes the truest self is not the one the world names, but the one you uncover in the silence of prayer.